Natural Health Podcast. We bring awareness to sustainable health in business hustle space. Natural Health Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve success and optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for French-sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. Today's episode, we talk to Hannah Wendt. Hannah has a long life passion for longevity and breakthrough disruptive technologies that drive radical improvement to the human condition. She attended the University of Kentucky and graduated with a degree in biology. During that time, she had multiple research internships studying cell signaling and cell biology. After graduating, she worked for the International Peptide Society as their Director of Research and Content. Through work in the integrative medicine industry, Hannah saw an opportunity for methylation-based aging diagnosis and started TruDiagnostics in 2020. TruDiagnostic is a company focusing on methylation, array-based diagnostic for life extension and preventive healthcare servicing functional medicine providers. It has committed to research over 30 approved clinical trials investigating the epigenetic methylation changes of longevity and health interventions. Hannah has since created Everything Epigenetics, where she shares insights on how DNA regulations has an impact on your health. Hannah loves to read, and she's just now reading Harry Potter though. She's left-handed and has a Bernese mountain dog, Eve. Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, Hannah.
I've always been a big reader, but I guess most recently I've gotten more into the sci-fi world. I don't know if you've ever heard of the books, The Name of the Wind, by Patrick Rothfuss. So his is like a Harry Potter for young adults almost. So I actually read that first before Harry Potter. And since I like that so much, I was like, well, I guess I'll just start with the basics and read Harry Potter. So I'm on the second to last book.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Hannah. I love that. To get started, I want to know a little bit more about you, and I'm pretty sure the audience wants to know more about you. What have been the key turning points, and what got you so interested in methylation and DNA and all these things? What happened in your life to get you where you are today, Hannah?
Yeah, that is such an intriguing question, more about the journey of where I got to where I am today. So like you said in my introduction, I've done some cell signaling work and cell biology work at the University of Kentucky here in Lexington. And afterwards, I actually wanted to take a different route and become a genetic counselor. So I think in our journey, a lot of times we discuss the accomplishments to where we got to where we are today. I think one of my setbacks actually led me to where I am today. So I applied to genetic counseling school. Unfortunately, did not get in, chose to not reapply the following year, and really ended up taking a position in an integrative pharmacy space where I worked as really, again, more of that director of content and research, and got into the International Peptide Society. So, when one door closed, a couple other opened, and I got introduced to this functional medicine space. And in the pharmacy, we did really unique peptide products and needed a way to measure the efficacy of how those peptide products worked. So instead of waiting for a 40-year longitudinal trial to actually measure that effectiveness, we noticed that the epigenetic methylation testing in those biological age outcomes could actually affect the effectiveness before and after in a really short time period. So when really those interventional trials started to come out, which was at the end of 2019, we completely switched gears and started to get into that methylation space. And we already had that integrative functional preventative medicine audience for this type of testing. So it worked out. It was a really great synergistic opportunity where we took one thing we created and used it with an audience that we already had.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like you said, when one door closes, another one opens, and I love your attitude towards that. I love that. So you opened up TruDiagnostic in 2020. What was did you have a dream? Was it always a dream as a child to do this? Was it just that it fell on your lap? What was it? What gave you that passion to actually start it and go ahead with it all?
Yeah, the really triggering point that created TruDiagnostic, to get a little bit more into the weeds there, is there was a trial that came out, I mentioned in 2019, called the TRIIM trial, TRIIM, where they actually use growth hormone, metformin, and DHEA. And that is the first epigenetic methylation trial, interventional trial, where they saw a reversal in those age markers. So when they saw a reversal, that is when we actually said, okay, wow, this can actually measure if things are working in our regimen or if they're not. So epigenetic methylation, which I know we'll get into, has been around for quite some time. But it was at that point in 2019 in August, again, TRIIM trial, TRIIM, by Dr. Greg Fay out of UCLA, I think really started to turn heads in the space and answered the question about a biomarker, about there being a biomarker for aging.
Yeah, and that study has gone around multiple times and a lot of people refer to it. It's actually a huge one. And what I'll do is I'll also link it into the notes so people can access it. I absolutely love that. So here on the podcast, we're going to get into all of the epigenetic talks, and I'm so excited about that. Before we get into it, a little bit more about you. What do you define as optimal health? What does optimal health look like for you, Hannah?
Success means to me, and really optimal health, I would say prioritizing yourself, to an extent, and what you need. And especially when relating to your health, having balance, or being able to say no to things that don't serve you necessarily, right? I think in today's day and age, we always get caught up with what's next. It's really hard to slow down and focus in the moment where we're constantly thinking about our next step. So I really think being present is a great path to success. You need to focus on what you're doing now to be able to change the outcome in the future. Again, you can think back to when you were a kid even, and you didn't care if you had a schedule, or you didn't care if you never did XYZ, but now as an adult, sometimes it always feels like we have a never-ending cycle or schedule that we have to follow. So I really think being present and slowing down, being able to do things that serve you is what success and optimal health looks like to me.
Yeah, what a beautiful definition. And the word balance is used so loosely these days, but I love that you included having the balance and being in the present moment as success and optimal health. It's absolutely key. So thanks for sharing that with us, Hannah. I really appreciate it. Let's get into today's topic. I'm so excited, and I'm pretty sure the audience is. The big question: will aging be cured in my lifetime? So before we even get into that question, a lot of people might not understand what actually aging is. What is aging, Hannah?
The definition of aging, and I think a really great way to describe it is the loss of function over time. It's dysregulation, right? It's where on the cellular level, the tissue level, the organ level, the system level, your cells aren't necessarily differentiated. They start to look more and more similar to one another. They start to give off signals that they aren't supposed to, right? If A is trying to talk to B, it may be when you start to age that A is talking to C, which is not great, right? Just as a small example. So it's really that progressive loss of function, that degradation over time.
I love that definition. It's so simple. A lot of audience might be like, oh, she's going to give us a sciencey answer to this, but I love the simplicity.
The question, will aging be cured in my lifetime? Mahela, that is a heavy loaded question. That is a really good one. I don't know, to be quite honest. It really comes down to lifespan versus health span. Lifespan obviously being how long you live, health span being how healthy can you live until, right? You want to be 80 years old doing things that that you could do when you were 60 years old, right? I don't know about everyone listening, but I know when I'm 80 years old, I want to be able to walk to the bathroom. I want to take my dog on a walk, right? I want to be able to do things that require just your going about your regular normal daily life. So if aging will be cured in our lifetime, I don't know, but I think we will be able to extend health span and lifespan. Probably extend health span more than lifespan. A big question right now in our space is, again, if there is a cap on how long you can live. But I definitely think we'll be able to increase health span, and we're already seeing that with the modality of interventional therapies.
I love that, health span versus lifespan. And every time I talk to someone, most people want to extend their health span rather than their lifespan. They're like, what's the point of living till I'm 100 or 100 and something if I'm not healthy? But the interesting question that you just said right there, is there a cap to our lifespan? Is there a cap?
Yeah, I think, initially the experts in this space, and by initially, I probably have meant for the last 5 or 10 years or so, have really said that there wasn't. So if you go back and you look at a lot of papers, even from 2021, I would say, and you type into Google, what's the limit for aging? You'll see that actually the number of people over 100 is expected to reach 3.7 million by 2050. So that's a lot. And all these new statistical analysis are suggesting that there is no limit to the human lifespan, and argues that it's theoretically possible a person could reach 130 years old. So there's this concept of infinite longevity, and it's much more complicated than that. So by statistical analysis, they say, sure, we could live, to 130, which is way far past than what we've ever done currently. But I would say a lot of the professionals in our space who I talk with on a day-to-day basis definitely say there's going to be a cap somehow, right? And we'll argue a lot of the statistical analysis points just from more of a biology-based perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I would love to sit around that table and listen to that.
Yeah, be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because I think in Australia, the average is 83.5 from memory. It's different for males and females, but I think the average is about 83. So looking at adding an extra, 50 years, that's crazy.
Yeah. I think the US is not as good as Australia. I think it's around 77 years old. So adding, like you said, about 50 years would be insane.
Yeah, so come move to Australia and you add a few more years anyway.
Yes, I need to.
I love that. So a lot of people talk about, aging, our actual age, but then some people talk about our biological age, and people go, oh, I'm in this old, but my biological age is this. What does that mean? Yeah,
this is a huge trend right now, right? Everyone is talking about their biological age. It's like this new big thing. And it's been around for a long time. Right now it's just getting a lot of publicity, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But they actually used to measure back in I believe around the 1980s, they actually used to measure a biological age by how many cigarettes you smoked per day, basically by your pack years, which is a really crude measurement. That's awful, right?
Correct.
We can talk more about, how smoking affects your biological age, but essentially what that means and what they're doing is they're separating these aging processes. You have your chronological age, which of course is the number of years you've been on this earth. But the biological age is really how you're aging at a cellular level. So, after the smoking, the regulations and rules started to define greater biological age markers. A lot of you listening may be familiar with the telomere length, right? That used to be the gold standard for a biological age marker, but it's really, again, getting down to the cellular level. How is your body aging? How we all live different lives, every single person listening, Mahela, you and I, right? So how are those external stimuli, those external factors and what we're eating, drinking, affecting us at the cellular level? That's essentially what your biological age is.
Yeah, I love that you explain that so simply. And some people might be blown up and being like, what? There's a difference between how my cells age compared to how I age. And you can see that, right? Some people age a lot more and you're like, wow, you don't look that age. And it may have to do with their actual biological aging, how their cells are aging.
Exactly. And what you're defining right there, which is another great point, is really this idea of phenotypic variation, right? For Jennifer Aniston, I always give the example. She looks great for her age. She looks absolutely amazing. Not everyone her age, I believe she's around 50 some. Not everyone her age looks like that, right? And that's the idea of this phenotypic variation, that chronological age is not a good measurement, because we all know people who are 30 that look like they're 50, right? You're probably thinking of someone right now, and we all know people who are 50 that look like they're 30. So there has to be this other metric that gives us how we're aging on that cellular level.
Yeah, I've got so many questions going through my head, but you did mention smoking and so forth. So what would be like a number 1 or 2 or 3 risk factors that that make us age, our biological age, a lot faster?
Yeah, so backing up a little bit, why I hinted as to why this is so popular right now is because if you have a biological age that's older than your chronological age, or you have, a pace of aging that's increased, or anything is accelerated in that aging area, your increased risk for mortality and morbidity skyrockets. So that's why it's really important to measure this biological aging process. So talking about the things which accelerate it is obviously very important, and it's crucial to know what accelerates it. Now, it depends on the interpretation. There's all these different biological age clocks, but I would say from a lifestyle perspective, a lot of the ones that affect it are things like your smoking, things like your drinking. People on average who have alcohol use disorder, which I believe is about between 5 and 7 drinks for women per week and about double that for men, have a 2.22 year age acceleration. Things like your BMI, your air pollution even, right? And unfortunately, we can't just pick up and move where we physically are, but things like plastics and things like different microbes and whatnot in the air that we live in, those can all accelerate that biological aging clock.
Yeah, and it's crazy because these are the things that I, as a naturopath, always blab on about. How much plastic do you have? What's the air quality? Where do you live? All of these things. And now to put it out there and be like, this actually affects your aging. And then linking it back to what you said earlier, that aging is a huge factor for chronic disease. It's like, it just all makes sense, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's again, kind of that pathway. It's like a domino effect. We hear people preach these things all of the time, and then you put all those pieces together and it starts to click and it makes sense. So when you just mentioned, again, if you have an increased epigenetic age, it's really important to know that, because aging is the number 1 risk factor for most chronic disease and death. And I usually sound like a broken record because I'll say that a lot. But what that means is, for example, take the top 3 causes of death for 2020 in the US. That would be heart disease, that would be all types of cancer, and that would be COVID-19. Aging is the number 1 risk factor for all 3 of those. Of course, with your heart disease, you have hypertension and smoking and obesity. Aging is, through the roof there. For cancer, you have alcohol, smoking, and obesity. Aging, again, through the roof in terms of the risk factor. For COVID-19, you have male sex. They have an increased risk. You have smoking and obesity again, but aging beats it every single time. So biological aging is really dominating disease risk. Aging is an outwards projection of cognitive decline, arthritis, cancer, kidney disease, CVD, autoimmune disorders, type 2 diabetes, immune decline. I even really like this example. You can take the healthiest 80-year-old that has ever lived, and you can take the most unhealthy 20-year-old that has ever lived. Huge age difference, right? However, the 80-year-old is still a person who is at the most increased risk for all chronic disease and death, just because of their age.
Yeah, I like that. You're kind of putting things in my head where I'm like, a lot of people go, well, and I hear this, a lot of people, they go, I can't change my age. I can't change how many years I've been on this earth, right? And that's talking about their chronological age. They can't change that. But what I'm kind of getting to, and what we're going to get to, is you kind of can change your biological age, right? And therefore kind of maybe reduce the risk of those diseases that are out there that are age-related, which is mind-blowing, and I'm so excited to talk about that. I'm like, oh my gosh. But before we get into that, let's back up a little bit. I need to calm down. Let's back up a little bit and talk about biological age. And now that we know what it is, how do we measure it? You said telomeres was an old way, and a lot of people would be like, what? That's an old way? That's like the newest way, or that's like, a new thing coming out. So how did they used to measure biological age, and how do they measure it now? Are you able to give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah. So, again, it goes back to, we talked about the smoking, how much you smoked in a day. And then I mentioned telomeres really briefly as the first golden standard in the way to measure biological aging. There's a really great paper that talks about all of the ways you can measure biological aging. It was published back in 2017 that basically states telomeres have been studied the most out of any of the biological age predictors available today. My theory is it's been studied the most because we still don't really know what the heck they do. But basically, they have very, very low predictive power. So they're extensively validated. They've been studied over and over again, but their ability to predict outcomes is very low. And the definition of that is a hazard ratio. So a hazard ratio is actually the ability of, A to predict B. So we're talking biological age predictors, being able to predict mortality and morbidity. So telomere is going to be very, very low on that realm. More recently, really in 2011 and 2013 is when these first epigenetic methylation age clocks came out. And I know that's a mouthful, and I know it sounds scary, but all that means is basically the on and off switches, which control the expression of your genes. So, a lot of your listeners here are probably familiar with genetics, right? So let's compare genetics with epigenetics. They sound really similar. When you think genetics, you think of your A's and your T's, your C's and your G's. That's your baseline infrastructure DNA sequence. That does not change, unless you're doing some crazy gene editing or something of the sort. But that essentially
which is out change. There, and there's a lot of that happening, isn't there?
Yeah, very valid, because when I say it doesn't change, you'll get those couple people who says, well, it can, which is true. So genetics baseline sequence, for the most part, does not change naturally. Then you have your epigenetics. So epi is a Greek prefix, which means above. So when you're talking about epigenetics, think above your genes. So there are these little methyl markers, these CH3 groups, that can be placed on top of your genes. That's what's called the DNA methylation. And if something is methylated, that means that it is turned off. You are not getting gene expression. So just as a real life example, think of a desktop. Think of a really old large computer. The hardware is going to be your genetics, just the makeup, the outside, all of the pieces. But how it's talking in the insides, the software, that's going to be your epigenetics. So I know that can be, a little bit of a difficult example. Think of a light switch, really. DNA methylation. You want things to, some things are turned on, some things are turned off. And think of just your body, for example, your eyes and your heart. They have the same genetics, but what makes it your heart and what makes, these your eyes? They're those on and off switches. It's DNA being expressed in some areas and being expressed in not. And DNA methylation is not good or bad. A lot of times, Haley, you probably know, when people think of methylation, they think of the MTHFR gene or the COMT gene in your methylation pathways. For this, the purpose of today's talk, that is get that out of your mind. Think of, we're just thinking of, again, switches on top of the DNA. Some things you want turned on, some things you want turned off. You want your oncogenes, your cancer genes, to be turned off, but you want your tumor suppressor genes to be turned on.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the MTHFR gene and the COMT gene and so forth, because a lot of people would think about that when they think about methylation. And then how simply you explained it, that no, it's got to do with the on and off buttons on the gene. And we all have genes, like you said, and, you know, naturally you can't change them. And then the thing here, from what I'm understanding, is that it is the on and off button on those genes. Some we want on and some we want off, and that is what impacts our biological age.
Correct. Yeah. Wrapping that up. So, you know, really, where those methylation markers, to go a little bit more into the weeds, they're going to sit on the positions, basically a CPG, and that stands for your cytosine and guanine location. So your genes, two nucleotides with a phosphate bond holding them together. So these methyl markers sit on a CPG. There are about 28 million different methylation different CPGs in each cell type. So 28 million CPGs in each cell type. Right now, to date, we can only measure about between 800,000 and 900,000. That's basically the utmost you can physically test. So really, when you're testing your biological age using epigenetic methylation markers, we're testing a percentage of methylation at each of those CPG locations. So a percentage of methylation at each of those locations again. And what that comes out as is a beta value. This is as granular as it gets. But the beta value is a number between 0 and 1. 0 means it's unmethylated. 1 means it's methylated, and it's always going to fall somewhere in between. It's not binary. So, you know, we have, once we test your epigenetic methylation, we have about 800,000 and 900,000 of these beta values. And then we're going to use epigenetic clocks to interpret them for biological age. And those epigenetic clocks are going to be a combination or a mixture of, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning. You know, in the case of biological age, we're actually looking at, we're asking ourselves the question, well, what methylation markers are changing as you become older chronologically? So that's a really simple way to look at it.
Yeah, I love that. This gets me so excited. And oh my gosh, you probably would have been so excited when you launched this. You're like, oh my God, I just want to get it out to everyone. I want everyone to know their biological age, and I want everyone to be able to take control, I guess, of their health by knowing that.
Yeah, definitely. I like to say, well, someone actually said this to me on another podcast. We are able to shift our methylation markers in our favor, right? We're able to change them. You are mostly in control. You hear, you know, food is medicine, or DNA, you know, our DNA is not our destiny. All of those cliche little sayings, those are actually true.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love how you explained all of the on and off buttons to some individuals. So this is what TruDiagnostic measures. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It really comes down to the epigenetic clocks that you're using and that interpretation, which leads me to a really great point. I'm glad you asked that question. Is, you know, you'd want to make sure that you're using published, validated algorithms in the literature to actually interpret those, because there are a lot of algorithms out there, but you want to make sure that you're getting, you know, the biggest bang for your buck. You want to make sure that you're actually getting outcomes which you've asked the algorithm to perform.
So what is the major difference between TruDiagnostic and maybe other companies that may be doing this?
Yeah, I would say that's the most important. Number one, TruDiagnostic uses only validated, published algorithms. We hold ourselves to the highest scientific integrity level that there is out there, right? We want to make sure that we are giving our audience, our customers, our healthcare providers, the best outcomes so that they can make informed decisions on their health. What's working, what's not working, what can I adjust? So that is number one. I think, you know, number two, the scale of the CPGs that we're measuring, which I just defined for you. So the scale is very important, just because, you know, Mihaela, when you send in your sample, it's going to basically be backwards and forwards compatible, meaning that if we already ran your data, we're running the utmost we can, about 900,000 positions. So if the best, I don't know, say biological age predictor came out in 5 years, we would be able to use that algorithm and apply it to your data set that we already have. So you're really getting a lot of value for how many positions that we're measuring. We're always going to be growing in that realm. And I would say, number 3, this goes with number 1, but number 3 is the sample type or the collection method. So we actually do a blood-based sample. And that blood-based sample is really important because all of the validated and published algorithms available are going to be created using blood. So it's, we definitely don't recommend any type of saliva sample or any type of urine sample either. Sometimes you'll even see urine samples out there. And, again, a lot of ways I would say we stick out compared to other companies, but I'll leave you with this one. I think this is important. It is that we have our own lab. So I'm actually out of Lexington, Kentucky, and we built the lab from the ground up. So it's become our greatest asset. It's really fun. I'm glad we have it. We're able to do a lot of research and collaborations that way. But that means that every sample that gets sent to us is run under our headquarters, our roof. We know who is running your sample. We're a CLIA, CAP, CLEP certified lab, basically meaning that we check all the boxes. You don't have to worry about everything. We're following all of the most up-to-date rules and regulation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Hannah. A lot of individuals might be like, what's the difference? Because there's so many things out there. They're kind of interested to know their biological age, and they're like, well, what is the difference? Why should I choose this one instead of another one? But I love how you explain that to us. So the individual does the test, like they get a little kit, which I've got here, which I'm so excited to do, and I'm going to do it and I'll put it up. I'm a bit like, what's my age? But it's all good because, and I guess that's how the audience might be feeling too. They might be like, you know what? Let's say they're 40-year-olds and they get their test back and it says like 55. And I mean, that could be a little bit depressing in a way for some, but what is the benefit of finding it out? Like, what can you like do? Or like, first, let's go before that question is like, why would their age be 55 instead of it being 40, which is their chronological age? What are the factors mainly that could impact them? May age people faster. You've mentioned smoking, you've mentioned drinking, air quality, food, and so many other things. There's an actual study that I found that even major depressive disorder accelerates cellular aging. What are your thoughts on this? Is there anything else that you want to add on to it? Is there any other things that may accelerate cellular aging?
Yeah, no, that is another great question, especially when it comes to this, because there are so many things that accelerate that biological aging process. I think it's nice to be aware of those different factors, especially if we're in control for some of them. So, there's a really great systematic review. It's called a systematic review of biological, social, and environmental factors associated with epigenetic clock acceleration, where they look at about 156 plus publications, which report on factors related to accelerated epigenetic aging. And they look at 4 main clocks, and they all agree in direction of those effects, but they vary in size. So I'm just going to list off some other things that they go over. We mentioned smoking, you mentioned depression. That's another one that this study includes. They also talk about poor lung function, physical activity, low education level, alcohol we mentioned, right? Low socioeconomic status, low education level. I mentioned your BMI or your body mass index, even things like schizophrenia, your metabolic syndrome. So, being a male even, so to any men listening, we've always known that men tend to die a little bit younger. So there's always been that sex paradox. But it's even been studied, an article came out recently showing that men are biologically on average 4 years older than women. So that's such a great question, Mahela, because not only are there, disease types which accelerate these, but some of them are epidemiological, which means that for the most part, they're in our control. So if we can identify those and again, change our habits or change our ways, we will get different outcomes. Our methylation markers will shift differently, hopefully in our favor.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you referred to a study, and I would love to get the link to it so I can also put it down in the show notes.
Yeah.
And there's so many factors that affect it. And I mean, look, individuals might do the test, like I said, and then they come back and they might get a bit down and be like, oh, I'm so old biologically. My cells are so old. They're aging so old. What is the solution? Like, okay, so you measure it, you got the number. What do you do then? Like, what happens then?
Oh yeah, there's an entire treatment framework that we can really go over. A lot of conversations, I'm my title is a director of operations at TruDiagnostic, but I really work day in and day out with our healthcare providers, letting them know how to use our test in a clinical application and reviewing results with them and what they mean and what would be the best intervention to actually change those methylation markers. So I'm really that liaison with all of our healthcare providers. So I have this conversation all the time. It's one I love. I really break it down into 4 different categories. So on the bottom, you have your lifestyle factors, right? The lifestyle factors, I believe, truly mean the most here. Because if you don't address the lifestyle factors, it's really like putting a bandage over the problem and not really addressing and fixing that root cause, right? Root cause is a really big trending word right now in this preventative space, because we need to figure out, again, why you're not feeling good, maybe why your balance has been off, why your grip strength has been off, why you walk into a room and you don't remember why you're there, right? Those are all signs of aging. You're declining, right? You're not as able to think properly again, or in the case of balance, stand up as straight, or again, grab things in your hand. Those are all associated with advanced aging. So from a lifestyle perspective, there's even more subcategories you can break it down to. Things like your stress. Lower your stress levels. That is absolutely significant. That is something I need to work on. I'm usually a ball of stress, just naturally. But things like meditation or breathing exercises, reading, writing, whatever does it for you. Sleep, we want to get quality sleep and quantity sleep. So sleep is really huge too. A lot of you listening probably have an Oura ring or a different way to actually track your sleep and see if anything is off in that realm. And then there's diet. Eat whole foods, everyone. Eat natural foods, nothing artificial, nothing really processed, and restrict your calories. Okay, so caloric restriction is not the easiest intervention or protocol by any means, but that is one of the biggest, I would say, one of the studies with the most evidence is that eating less, just about 10% overall caloric restriction, is going to help lower a lot of those aging outcomes. The last lifestyle realm is going to be fitness. So fitness is a little bit harder. All we know right now really about fitness is we love a mix of aerobic and anaerobic exercises. So make sure you're changing what you're doing. And instead of calling it exercise or working out, I like to say move your body. Move your body about 5 times a week if you can. And, doing yoga, stretching, and walking, those are all considered, moving your body. So I'm one to usually want to run, or I have to sweat to think I'm making progress, but we don't need to see that all of the time. We need to give our body a break and teach it different ways to actually get more of a response to aerobic and both anaerobic.
Hannah, thank you so much. You've just shared absolutely amazing information about lifestyle, diet, fitness. Let's dig into a little bit about the exciting part that most people are really excited to talk about, which would be supplement and medication. Would there be any supplement or any medication? I mean, this is also talk to your healthcare advisor and so forth for putting it out there. But does the research say anything about supplements and medications to extend potential lifespan?
Yeah, definitely. This is probably one of the most popular questions I would say that we get, right? Everyone wants to know, what are things that I can do to actually reduce or shift those methylation markers in my favor? So starting out with supplements, my number one recommended supplement that is heavily backed by the literature is going to be vitamin D. And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, right? Vitamin D is receiving a lot of press right now in the media, especially, I know around here when it's wintertime, we're not able to get as much maybe from the sun as we would like. But studies do show that about 4,000 to 6,000 IU of that vitamin D supplementation per day is going to show improvements. There's about 4 different studies that it shows improvements on with major epigenetic age clocks as well. So it's not only improving one area of epigenetic age clocks, but a couple of them too. So it makes it very exciting. I still think there needs to be more studies done, but usually, again, rule of thumb is anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 IU per day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And when you think about that too, it's kind of like, yes, check your vitamin D levels, but at the same time, ensure that your liver and kidneys are functioning to an optimal level, because without them functioning well, you're not going to get the conversion of the proper vitamin D.
Yep, exactly. It all goes back to that mechanism of action too, which is why I love working with our healthcare providers at TruDiagnostic, because alongside with their epigenetic methylation testing, or measuring their biological age markers, the healthcare providers that I work with, which I'm sure you fall in the same boat, but you're also going to measure a lot of those laboratory values too. So you can use them together, because I don't think, there's hopefully epigenetic methylation will be this in the future, but there's not really one test where you can get all of those different outcomes. So it's nice to look at them synergistically.
Yeah, I love that. Is there anything else like vitamin C, curcumin, CoQ10, collagen, anything else that literature kind of backs up in regards to anti-aging?
Yeah. No, you're, again, pushing and wanting more data behind these metrics. I think one of the most exciting things about epigenetic methylation testing is its ability. However, it is very limited just because it is so new. There is another study, though, I do want to bring up. It's actually called Dietary Intervention Modifies DNA Methylation Age Assessed by the Epigenetic Clock. And I really like this study because it's taking together 2 omic components. It's taking together your genomics and then your epigenomics. So your genetics and your epigenetics. And what it states is that women in particular with the MTHFR677CC variant are going to have an increased biological age. And same with men who have that same variant, but it's going to be the MTHFR677TT. So they're going to have these increased biological ages. However, and they only notice this in women, and I'll speculate as to why at the end here. When they supplemented with a methylated cofactor like 5-methylfolate or methylcobalamin, they actually saw almost an instantaneous reversal of that biological age by a statistically significant amount. So what's happening is you're giving the body hypermethylation. So if you're giving the body hypermethylation with those methylated cofactors, you're turning some things off that we don't want to be turned off. You're regulating that methylation pathway, right? So that's hypermethylation. However, remember, in our case, methylation is not good or bad. So when we think of our global DNA methylation, it's almost like a seesaw or a teeter-totter, where on the other side, you want to have hypomethylation. So you want to have less methylation, because less methylation means you're turning some things on, you're getting those genes to be expressed. And some things for hypomethylation are going to be your flavonols. So we're really big fans of the EGCG, green tea extract, for example, any of the citrus bergamot as well, or excuse me, the berberine. So all of those would be considered hypomethylators. So again, it's all about balancing it. So they saw the reversal in women, but not men. And I don't think they saw the reversal in men, unfortunately, for you listening, just because they dosed them the same. So I think if you obviously there's a dosing issue with, you're going to have to give different dosing to different people. So that's why I think you don't see the same reversal in men.
That is so interesting. And I love that you mentioned that, because even though your genes may say one thing, there are things that you can do in your lifestyle, in your diet, in your life that may be able to change it and may be able to work more beneficially for you.
Right. Absolutely. So those are 2, I would say, very well, curated studies in the epigenetic methylation space.
Amazing. Let's jump onto medications. I know that clearly you have to talk to your doctor and so forth, but we're just looking at what the research says. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so medication, medication can mean a different definition in different, countries or states even. So one of them that I'll throw out there that we don't have a isolated interventional trial for, but what was included in the TRIIM trial with Dr. Greg Fay would be DHEA. So, that can be, I would say, supplement medication, depending on where you live. But the reason we're really big fans of DHEA, and they did about 50 milligrams in their study was all men. So it makes sense that it was a higher amount of DHEA. But we think they saw the large reversal in their study due to the DHEA for its ability to mitigate your cortisol levels. Because on the clock, which they saw a reversal, about a third of those positions, those methylation markers, are on or near glucocorticoid receptor elements. So we know that stress has a huge effect, as I talked about earlier, on accelerating that biological age. So I personally think, DHEA is one that we'll have to keep our eye out and see additional research to come out. For premenopausal women, could be anywhere from 2.5 to 5 milligrams, I would say. If you're postmenopausal, you could get away with doing a little bit higher dosing, like 10 milligrams to even 50 milligrams, but definitely consult with your healthcare provider. I'll say the last medication I'll go over, or, I would say it's a combination of a supplement and more of a medication, is going to be the quercetin and dasatinib data. So that's going to be more of that senolytic combination, where I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the quercetin. It's going to be that flavanol. You can get it through specific food intake, or you can take a supplement. And then dasatinib, this may be a relatively new one. It is actually FDA approved for chronic myeloid leukemia, and used at very, very high dosing to help kill and turn over some of those cancer cells. And it's taken much more frequently by cancer patients as well. However, if you dose it very, very small with that quercetin, we do about 50 milligrams dasatinib, 500 milligrams quercetin, 3 consecutive days in a row for 6 months, is the protocol we did in a particular clinical trial. We do see better epigenetic age reversals and things happening within the immune cell subsets that are more favorable. So the senolytic supplements and compounds and medications, whatever you wish to call those, formulas, I think look very promising too. They're definitely changing something in that epigenome.
Yeah, wow. This is absolutely amazing. You've shared some absolutely amazing little tips with us, research studies. And it's quite interesting, because what you said about is, if we kind of like, what I've imagined is, if you go outside in the sun, if you walk a lot or exercise, lift some weights, if you eat a really healthy whole food diet, and if you don't stress too much, you're kind of hitting all of those things that we spoke about without even taking medication, without even taking supplements. You're kind of looking after yourself.
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Look, Hannah, is there anything else you want to share with us for the Natural Podcast on this absolutely amazing episode today? Anything else that you want to share about?
You know what? I just want to thank you. This has been great. Yeah, I really appreciate your time, Mihaela. This has been, an amazing opportunity. I'm really happy that you're able to share this with all of your listeners. If anyone has any other questions, they can direct them to you, Mihaela. You can send them over to me. I'm happy to answer, happy to talk with anyone who wants to chat further about epigenetics.
I love that. Before we let you go, one last question. What is your natural health hack, Hannah? What do you do every day, once a month, that really gets you healthy?
Oh, yeah, this is a good one. I would say something I've been better about. And again, I know I mentioned it previously. It's really looks promising in reversing the biological aging, is eating less, caloric restriction. I would say, I've been practicing that. I usually a smaller lunch, or do 24-hour fast once a week or even once a month. But, we have to always ask ourselves the question before are we actually hungry, or are we just doing this because it's a habit? And, maybe half the time you'll find yourself answering that it's just a habit. So I really think that looks promising in extending our longevity.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable knowledge and information with us, Hannah, today. And thank you so much for joining us on Natural Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health. Content and information provided here is opinion of Mahela Raguse and is for information purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. It is not intended to provide medical advice or take the place of medical advice or any current treatment you're undertaking. Consult your own medical professionals for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the Natural Health Podcast. It is advised that you consult your doctor or healthcare professional in relation to any health concerns you may be having. Mahela Raguse does not take responsibility for any health consequences which occur from a person listening, viewing, or reading this content. Under no circumstances shall the Natural Podcast, Mahela Raguse, any guests or contributors to the Natural Podcast, or any employees, associates, or affiliates of Mahela Raguse be responsible for damages arising from the information provided on the Natural Podcast. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical conditions in either yourself or others. Please note, if you're taking prescription, do not stop your medication or start a new protocol, including but not limited to supplements, diet, lifestyle changes without consulting your doctor or healthcare professional. If you or any person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical advice. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have read or heard on the Natural Podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. Neither Mahela Raguse nor the publisher of this content takes responsibility for the possible health consequences of any person or persons reading or listening or following the information in educational content.